The frontier town of Willow Creek sat low and dusty against the endless prairie, its wooden storefronts weathered by wind and sun, its streets marked by wagon wheels and the heavy boots of men who carved their lives from the raw land. In this town, where justice was thin as paper and loyalty was often bought with silver, the law wore a worn badge and carried the weight of both fear and respect. That badge belonged to Sheriff James Hollister. James was a man carved from the same rugged timber as the land he patrolled. Broad-shouldered, clear-eyed, and steady-handed. His reputation stretched further than the county line. Folks said his word was as binding as a judge's gavel, and his aim sharper than any gunslinger. Foolish enough to test him. But beneath the badge, beyond the steel gaze, James carried a secret as fragile and dangerous as a glass flame. He was married to Eliza Beaumont, the daughter of the wealthiest rancher in Willow Creek. Their love had sparked quietly in places where eyes did not follow. James had first noticed her one evening when he rode up to the Beaumont estate to settle a dispute over cattle. Eliza had stood on the porch in the fading light, her auburn hair catching fire in the sunset, her voice soft yet firm as she tried to calm her father's temper. Unlike the town's young ladies who fluttered for attention, Eliza carried herself, with grace touched by defiance, her heart yearning for something beyond the gilded cage of her family's fortune. In the nights that followed, they met in shadows, by the willow trees near the creek that gave the town its name. There, away from the stares of men who measured love by land and cattle, James and Eliza found in each other what the world denied them: freedom. For James, it was a freedom from duty and the iron laws that chained him. For Eliza, it was freedom from the suffocating weight of expectations, from a father who saw her as nothing more than a bargaining chip to merge ranching empires. One moonlit night, their whispered promises turned into vows. With only the stars as witnesses and a traveling preacher they'd persuaded into silence, James and Eliza became man and wife. He slipped a simple silver band onto her finger, a stark contrast to the diamonds her father would demand for her hand. In that moment, the world seemed theirs alone, untamed, unbroken, boundless as the prairie. But secrets, like embers in dry grass, are never still for long. The Beaumont name carried weight in Willow Creek. Eliza's father, William Beaumont, had clawed his way to fortune with cattle herds that stretched across half the county and a temper that broke weaker men in half. He was a man who dealt in alliances, not affections. To him, Eliza was a bargaining piece to be wed to the son of another powerful rancher, sealing a bond that would secure wealth for generations. He had no notion, yet, that his daughter's heart already belonged to a man he considered beneath her. The danger was not only in her father's wrath. The town itself thrived on whispers, on scandal passed from porch to porch. The sheriff, bound by his oath to uphold order, was expected to live above reproach. A secret marriage between lawman and heiress was tinder to a fire that could consume them both. Still, James and Eliza clung to the stolen hours they shared. He would ride out under the cover of darkness, his horse carrying him swift and silent to the edge of the Beaumont lands. She would meet him with a lantern hidden beneath her shawl, her eyes alight with the kind of devotion that made every risk seem small. For a time, love was enough. Yet the horizon was darkening. A rival rancher, Thomas Garrison, had begun pressing. William Beaumont for Eliza's hand in marriage to his son, a union that would combine fortunes and secure dominance over the county's cattle trade. William saw the match as inevitable, even righteous. Eliza, desperate to resist, felt her secret life with James tightening like a noose. James knew it too. Every night he held her, he felt the weight of the badge pressing against him. The reality, that truth could shatter everything they had built in silence. Yet to let her go was unthinkable. And so, as summer's heat thickened over Willow Creek, the sheriff and the rancher's daughter carried on their secret vows beneath the indifferent stars. They told themselves love could conquer all, that if their bond was strong enough, no power in the world could break it. But in the West, love and fate were never gentle companions. And as the cattle drives rumbled in, bringing strangers, greed, and unrest into town, the storm that would test James and Eliza's love had already begun to gather. The heat of summer pressed down heavy on Willow Creek, thick with dust and the restless hum of cattle drives pushing north. The town was alive with drifters, gamblers, and traders, each chasing fortune or fleeing ruin. For Sheriff James Hollister, it meant long days patrolling streets brimming with tempers and whiskey, his badge glinting beneath the merciless sun. But for James, the greater weight lay not in the law he carried, but in the secret that pulsed beneath his every step. At night, when the town slept and the prairie stretched quiet under the moon, he would ride to the Beaumont estate. Eliza would meet him in the shadows, her lantern throwing golden halos around her face, her eyes burning with a devotion that made every risk seem small. In those moments, she was not the daughter of William Beaumont, nor was he the lawman sworn to uphold order. They were simply husband and wife, bound by vows the world must never see. But the walls were closing in. William Beaumont had grown restless. With his wealth threatened by rival ranchers and his legacy hanging in balance, he had begun pressing his daughter harder toward marriage with Thomas Garrison's son. "It's for the good of the land," William would thunder at the dinner table, his fist shaking the silverware. "You'll bring honor to this family, Eliza, and I'll hear no more of your childish refusals." Eliza, her heart steady but her voice trembling, would plead for more time. But her father was a man who dealt in cattle and contracts, not in patience. The pressure thickened like storm clouds. In town, whispers grew. Folks noticed how often the sheriff's patrols took him near the Beaumont ranch. They noticed the way Eliza's eyes followed James when he rode past in the street, a glance too tender, too telling. In a place like Willow Creek, where gossip traveled faster than a prairie fire, it was only a matter of time before rumors hardened into truth. The spark came from an unexpected hand. One evening, after breaking up a fight at the saloon, James found himself face to face with Thomas Garrison. The man was broad and brash, carrying the smug assurance of wealth that had never been earned by his own sweat. With whiskey on his breath, he leaned close to James and sneered. "Sheriff," he drawled, "I hear tell you've been riding out Beaumont way a bit too often for a lawman. Care to explain what business you've got with another man's daughter?" The words struck like a brand to dry kindling. James kept his face calm, but his chest tightened. "My business is keeping the peace," he replied, his voice low. "And you'd do well to mind yours." But Thomas only smirked, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Peace won't keep Eliza warm at night. My family's fortune will. And when she's mine, Sheriff, I'll make sure she forgets whatever notion she's been playing at." James said nothing, but his hand twitched near the butt of his revolver. The urge to draw, to silence Thomas forever, burned in him. But the law held him steady. He turned and walked away, though his heart raged with fire. That night, beneath the willow trees by the creek, James told Eliza what had passed. She listened, her hands trembling as she clutched his. "He suspects," she whispered, fear clouding her voice. "If he tells my father—" James drew her close, his jaw set with grim resolve. "Then we'll leave," he said. "We'll ride far from here, where no man can tell us who to love or how to live." For a moment, hope flickered in her eyes, but it died as quickly as it came. "My father will never allow it," she murmured. "He would chase us to the ends of the earth, and you'd lose everything, your badge, your honor, your life." James pressed his forehead to hers, his voice breaking. "What's a badge worth, Eliza, if it keeps me from the woman I love?" It was a vow spoken from the marrow of his soul. But even as he said it, fate was already weaving a crueler path. For Thomas Garrison, drunk with spite, wasted no time in carrying his suspicions to William Beaumont. One evening, as dusk bled across the plains, Thomas arrived at the Beaumont ranch, his words dripping venom. "Sheriff Hollister's been meeting your daughter in secret," he said, his grin sharp as a knife. "Ask her where she rides at night, and see if she answers truthfully." William's face darkened like thunder. He stormed into the house, his boots striking the floorboards like gunfire. Eliza, startled, rose from her chair as his fury filled the room. "Where have you been, girl?" he roared. "Don't lie to me. You think I don't know? You've shamed this family, sneaking about with that lawman." Eliza's lips parted, but no words came. Her secret, their secret, lay naked in her father's wrath. And before she could speak, his voice cut like a whip. "You are no daughter of mine if you choose him. By God, I'll see the sheriff ruined before I let you disgrace this house." Eliza's heart shattered in her chest. In that moment, she knew the storm they had feared had arrived, and there would be no shelter from. The Beaumont Ranch, once a house of order and pride, had become a battlefield of broken hearts and thunderous tempers. William Beaumont's fury boiled over like a prairie storm, his voice echoing through the halls as he demanded Eliza forsake James. But Eliza stood tall, her tears hidden behind eyes that glowed with a fierce and quiet fire. "I love him," she said, her voice trembling but unbroken. "I am his wife." The words dropped heavy, like stones into a still pond, sending shockwaves through the room. William staggered back as though struck. "His wife?" The word came out as a hiss. "By God, you've gone and done it. You've bound yourself to that lawman in secret. You've shamed me before every rancher, every man of standing in this county." Rage consumed him, but beneath it pulsed something colder. Betrayal. William Beaumont was not a man who could abide secrets, and now the greatest of them sat in his own house, defying him with eyes too much like her mother's. He turned on his heel, his face ashen with fury. "Get out," he spat. "Both of you. I'll not see your faces under this roof again." Eliza collapsed against the stair rail, her breath shuddering, but even in the depths of her pain, she felt James's arms circle her, steady as iron. The sheriff had come in haste when summoned by her desperate note, only to arrive in time to hear her confession. Now, with the truth bared and her father's wrath unleashed, James knew there was no road back. The scandal spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. By dawn, the whole town whispered of it, the mighty Beaumont heiress and the sheriff, bound in a secret marriage. Some called it romance, others folly, but most shook their heads with a blend of pity and delight, savoring the downfall of pride brought low. For a lawman whose very office depended on respect, the whispers cut deep. Still, James held his head high. He rode the streets as he always had, his badge gleaming in the sun, but every stare reminded him that his authority had been shaken. Men muttered in saloons that he'd used his position to court favor. Women whispered that Eliza had thrown away a fortune for a badge and a gun. Even friends turned their eyes, unsure where loyalty should fall. The greatest blow came not from gossip, but from the law itself. A group of townsmen, stirred by Thomas Garrison's venom and William Beaumont's influence, called for James's resignation. They argued that a sheriff tainted by scandal could no longer command the trust of the people. When the town council voted, James knew the verdict before it was spoken. By week's end, he would be sheriff no longer. That night, James and Eliza sat together on the porch of a small cabin at the edge of town, the place they had fled to when her father cast her out. The prairie stretched wide before them, the stars wheeling silently overhead. Eliza rested her head against his shoulder, her voice soft as the night wind. "We could go," she whispered. "We could leave Willow Creek, start anew, somewhere no one knows us, somewhere we're not the sheriff and the rancher's daughter, just a man and his wife." James wrapped his arm around her, the weight of her hope pressing against the heaviness in his chest. He wanted nothing more than to give her that dream. But the land had its claws in him. Willow Creek was his home, the place where he had sworn to bring law to the lawless, to carve order from chaos. To leave was to abandon everything he had built, everything he had believed himself to be. Yet when he looked into Eliza's eyes, he knew the truth. His oath was no longer to a badge or a town. It was to her. And so, in the dark hours before dawn, James packed his saddlebag and saddled his horse. Eliza stood beside him, her shawl drawn tight, her silver wedding band catching the pale light of the moon. They did not look back at the town as they rode out, their silhouettes cutting through the tall grass like shadows fleeing the past. Behind them lay scandal, betrayal, and the ashes of a life they could no longer claim. Ahead stretched the unknown, wild country, dangerous and uncharted. But it was theirs to face, together. The prairie wind rose as they rode, carrying away the whispers of Willow Creek, carrying them into the vast silence of the West. And though history would remember William Beaumont as a titan of cattle and wealth, it would not remember the sheriff who once wore the badge of Willow Creek. His name would fade from the records, his deeds forgotten by time. But somewhere beyond the horizon, in a land untamed and unbroken, Sheriff James Hollister and Eliza Beaumont lived not as symbols of scandal but as what they had always longed to be, simply man and wife, bound not by law or fortune but by love unshaken by the cruel hand of fate.